You know that specific Sunday evening feeling. Not quite dread, not quite anxiety. Just a quiet heaviness that settles somewhere in your chest when you think about the week ahead and the bills attached to it. Most people carry that feeling around without ever naming it. They just know it shows up reliably, right around the time the paycheck math stops adding up and the month still has 10 days left in it. If that feeling visited you recently, stay with me. Because what I am about to show you is not a lecture about lattes or a guilt trip about your spending habits. It is an honest look at a machine most Americans are living inside without ever being shown how it actually works. And once you can see the gears clearly, something quietly shifts. The feeling does not have to be permanent. Here is the number that started this conversation. Research into American household spending patterns shows something that stops people cold when they first encounter it. A significant portion of American households are spending meaningfully more than they earn, not slightly more, not rounding errors, genuinely more. For the lowest earning households in the country, the gap between income and spending runs past 200%, according to Bureau of Labor Statistics data. For every dollar coming in, more than $2 are going out. Now, before you exhale and think that describes someone earning far less than you, stay right there. Because the honest version of this story does not stay comfortably at the bottom of the income ladder. It reaches much further up than most people are comfortable admitting. The average American household earns around $80,000 before taxes and spends somewhere close to that entire amount. On the surface, that looks responsible. But averages are generous liars. A relatively small number of very high-earning households pulls that average upward, which means the household sitting right in the middle of America is actually working with noticeably less than that figure suggests. And when you factor in taxes, healthcare costs, housing, and transportation, the cushion between a normal month and a genuinely bad one gets thin very quickly. Here is the number that reframes everything. Roughly 2/3 of American consumers report living paycheck to paycheck, not the struggling fifth at the bottom. 2 out of every 3 people. And more than 1/3 of all households are currently carrying more credit card debt than emergency savings. Same income as before. Thinner cushion than anyone expected. So the real answer to why this happens is not laziness. It is not irresponsibility. It is a machine. And it was assembled one gear at a time over decades. Let me show you how it runs. The first gear, the cost of the unavoidable, the expenses that broke the math for most Americans, were not the fun ones. They were the ones nobody gets to skip. Over the last several years, the cost of the things you simply cannot avoid climbed faster than most paychecks did. Rent, groceries, insurance, utilities, prescription costs. For lower and middle-earning households, wages have been losing that race. And when the floor of your life gets more expensive faster than your income grows, something has to absorb the difference. You already know what usually does. For the typical American household, close to 1/3 of all spending goes toward housing alone. Transportation swallows nearly another 1/6. Stack food on top of those two, and an enormous portion of the budget is spoken for before anyone has made a single discretionary choice. This is not a story about people buying things they do not need. This is a story about the concrete floor of modern life rising faster than the people standing on it. When someone tells you they are working hard and getting nowhere, this arithmetic is almost always what they are feeling without being able to name it. The second gear. The credit card steps forward when necessities cost more than a paycheck can cover. The credit card quietly becomes the shock absorber. One month it is a car repair that could not wait. The next it is a medical bill nobody budgeted for. A slow week at work here. A school expense there. None of it feels reckless while it is happening. Each swipe feels like survival rather than indulgence. Which is precisely why the balances have grown the way they have. Total household debt in America recently crossed record levels. credit card balances alone have climbed by more than 60% since their pandemic low just a few years back. That is not a gentle drift. That is Americans piling onto borrowed money in a remarkably short window. Most of it simply to keep normal life running. Here is what makes that number genuinely alarming. The average interest rate on that debt sits around 21%. So the money people borrowed just to survive an expensive year now costs them a fortune to carry. In a single recent year, Americans handed over more than $170 billion purely in credit card interest and fees. That money bought nothing. No groceries. No rent. No memories. It simply evaporated into the cost of owing. And while all of that was climbing, the number that should have been rising went the other direction. The personal savings rate, the share of income Americans actually managed to keep, has been sliding. Rising costs pushing on one side, shrinking savings collapsing on the other. Revolving debt filling the gap between them at 21%. That is the whole machine in one sentence. The third gear, the decisions that felt reasonable here, is the part that catches most people off guard. Because the households spending more than they earn are rarely doing anything that looked obviously wrong at the time. The machine does not announce itself. It operates through a chain of perfectly sensible steps, each one defensible on its own. Let me show you through a few people. These are composites built from extremely common situations rather than real individuals. But every pattern attached to them is real. And you may recognize more than one. Start with a woman I will call Marie. She is in her late 40s. She got a meaningful raise 2 years ago, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had genuinely arrived. The raise was real and earned. What quietly arrived alongside it was an upgrade of nearly everything around her. A slightly nicer apartment because surely she deserved it now. A newer vehicle because the old one had more than 100,000 miles. A gym membership. Streaming services she actually uses. Food delivered a few more nights a week because the hours got longer. No single choice looked reckless from the outside. But her spending rose to meet the raise and then leaned just past it. The industry calls this lifestyle creep, and it is how a genuine pay increase can leave someone feeling more stretched than before rather than less. Marie is not careless. She is simply human inside a system engineered to absorb every extra dollar the moment it appears. Then there is a man I will call Dennis. His trouble arrived through no fault of his own. When his hours were cut for a few months, he leaned on a credit card to keep the lights on. Completely understandable. The kind of thing that happens to decent hard-working people every year. But here is where the trap closes. Dennis does the responsible-looking thing and pays well above the minimum every month. He feels like he has the situation handled. At 21% interest, though, that balance follows him for years and costs him nearly as much in interest as he originally borrowed. He did not overspend on anything foolish. He simply got caught in the arithmetic of owing money at a punishing rate. And then there is a couple I will call the Garcias. They clear a combined income well above the national average and still feel squeezed by the 20th of every month. On paper, they are doing everything right. In reality, a larger paycheck simply bought them a larger set of obligations. Bigger mortgage. 2 financed vehicles. Private activities for the kids. Vacations that started to feel mandatory once their friends began posting theirs. Their fixed costs quietly swelled to consume nearly their entire income. So a single unexpected expense still sends them reaching for the card. Exact same position as everyone else, just denominated in larger numbers. This is the honest reason a raise alone almost never fixes this. The machine does not care how much comes in. It simply expands to meet it. The simple rules that quiet the machine. None of what follows is dramatic. None of it will trend anywhere. But these are the moves that quietly rebuild the space between what you earn and what you spend. And that space is the only thing that actually matters. The first rule is to find your real number, not the rough figure floating in your head. The actual one. For most people, spending feels like a vague fog, a blur of taps and transfers that never quite adds up to a clear total. So for one ordinary month, you become a quiet witness to your own money. Every dollar out. Written down or tracked by a simple app. Zero judgment. Just honest observation. What you are looking for is the distance between what you assume you spend and what you actually spend. That gap is almost always wider than expected. And it carries no shame. Nobody can close a gap they refuse to look at. This one honest number is the most valuable piece of financial information in your entire life. The second rule is to separate the floor from the fog. Your floor is the spending that genuinely keeps your life running. Housing, food, transportation, healthcare, the things that were never optional. The fog is everything that crept in quietly while you were not watching. Subscriptions you forgot existed. Upgrades that became your new default. Installment payments that felt weightless at checkout and are now stacked 4 deep, hitting your account on different days of the month. You are not going to burn everything down. You are simply going to walk slowly through the fog and ask one honest question about each thing you find. If this disappeared tomorrow, would I go out and pay real money to bring it back? For a genuinely surprising portion of the fog, the honest answer is no. Those are not sacrifices. Those are leaks you simply stopped noticing were running. The third rule is to build the buffer before you attack the debt. This is the step most people skip, and it is why their progress keeps washing away. Before you charge at the credit card balance, you build a small cushion. Even a modest amount set aside somewhere slightly out of reach. Here is why the order matters. The reason people reach for the card when the car breaks down is that there is nothing standing between them and the emergency. Build even a small buffer, and the next surprise gets paid in cash instead of becoming a fresh balance at 21%. That cushion is the wall that stops the bleeding so that the progress you are about to make actually holds. While you are building that buffer, here is a rule that quietly prevents half the emergencies people blame for their debt. Most financial surprises are not actually surprises. Car repairs, holiday expenses, annual insurance bills, back-to-school costs. They arrive on a rough schedule every year. Yet they always feel like an ambush. The fix is to name them in advance and set aside a small amount each month toward each one long before the bill lands. When the car repair fund already exists, the emergency stops being an emergency. You are simply paying for life in advance instead of borrowing for it after the fact. The fourth rule is to attack the most expensive debt first. Remember Dennis paying 21% just to carry a balance. No investment strategy, no budgeting app, no side hustle reliably beats the guaranteed return of no longer paying 21% interest. Not all debt is the same. A manageable mortgage or a low-rate student loan is a slow, cool ember compared to revolving credit card debt burning at 21%. You do not need to panic about the low-rate debt. You need to point everything at the expensive high-rate balance until it is gone. Take every dollar freed up from the first 2 rules and direct it at the highest rate balance while paying only minimums on everything else. When that balance dies, roll its entire payment straight onto the next one. The relief compounds as you go, because every balance you clear releases money that was previously disappearing silently into interest every month. The fifth rule is to automate the gap. Once you have breathing room, the worst thing you can do is leave the freed up money sitting in your checking account. Money within easy reach has a reliable way of becoming money spent on nothing in particular. You move it automatically the day right after payday before your spending has any chance of noticing it arrived. This one habit is what separates people who quietly pull ahead from people who stay permanently stuck. And it has almost nothing to do with the size of the paycheck. A modest automatic transfer that runs on schedule whether or not you feel motivated will outperform heroic willpower every single time. Because willpower gets tired. A system does not. The old phrase for this is paying yourself first. And it flips the usual order entirely. Instead of spending all month and saving whatever happens to survive you, hand your future self its share the moment the paycheck lands. Then, you live on what remains. What the gap actually becomes, let me show you what a recovered gap can turn into, because this is where the math stops feeling heavy and starts feeling like momentum. Say you do the work and free up $250 a month. Not a fortune. Roughly what most people uncover when they take one honest look at the fog. Invested consistently at a historically reasonable long-term rate of around 7% annually, that $250 a month grows to somewhere in the range of $300,000 over 30 years. Of that total, only around $90,000 is money you personally set aside. The rest is growth. $250,000 earned quietly while you slept, worked, and simply lived your life. And the detail that changes everything is time. Take that same $250 a month, but start just 5 years later than you could have. The ending balance drops by roughly $100,000. Same amount. Same rate. 5 fewer years. That is what compounding does when you give it time versus when you make it wait. The dollars you put in earliest are the ones that grow the longest. Which means the single most valuable thing you own right now is not a big income, it is the time still in front of you. And it is leaving whether or not the decision gets made. The honest close spending more than you earn is rarely a math failure at its root. It is almost always a visibility failure. The entire system is built so the outflow stays invisible and frictionless, while the consequences arrive late and all at once long after the decisions that caused them. Every step I just described is really just one thing repeated in different forms. Dragging the outflow back into the light. One honest look at a time. The people who feel calm about money are almost never the highest earners in the room. They are the ones who can see clearly, who know their real number, who closed their gap on purpose and then pointed it somewhere that actually worked for them. And if you have been carrying quiet shame through any part of this conversation, set it down here. The gap you have been living in was built by an entire industry of very capable people whose specific job is to make spending feel effortless and saving feel invisible. Feeling behind inside a system designed to keep you behind is not a personal failing. It is the expected result. What changes your life is not punishing yourself for the years before you knew this. It is deciding today to be the person who looks at the number on purpose instead of hovering over the app hoping for the best. Think back to that Sunday evening feeling we started with. The quiet heaviness. The math that never quite settles. The goal was never to make that feeling worse. The goal is to make it disappear entirely, replaced by the quiet steadiness of someone who already knows what the number will say. Because they built their gap deliberately. And they know exactly where every dollar is heading. That is not a fantasy version of financial life reserved for high earners or lucky people. It is the natural result of 5 simple, unglamorous rules applied consistently by an ordinary person who finally decided to look.